Hello and welcome back to the Eltham Carson YouTube channel. So I finally figured out how to capture my screen and got OBS working, so I thought I would talk about one of the most helpful concepts for me, and this is how to process low-end, process drums. Um, this is the foundation of mixing. If you can stack your low end correctly and handle your harshness in the cymbals and balance that with the rest of the arrangement, I think you have mostly done what it takes to do a good mix. So this is something I tracked a while back. I'm not trying to give away too much here, but let's have a listen, and then I can tell you what I'm doing. Okay, so a couple things. One, you may notice that the kick and the snare volumes are quite low, and that's because I find that drums sound punchiest when the gain isn't cranked. There's plenty of time to distort and push things later if you want, but I find that if you don't capture those dynamics properly, you don't really have anything. The overhead and fill, this is a Glyn Johns setup. This is how I think of it because I keep it mono. I don't think of it as right and left. I think a lot of great music has mono drums. I think it actually kind of sounds more realistic, especially if you think about a live setting. A lot of great guitar music, the drums are actually quieter. They're voiced really well, they're played really well, but they're not as dominant in the actual mix as you may think. And that, especially because they're centered, it allows the guitars to really take the center stage. And keeping cymbals and guitars happy together is one of the most difficult things you can do. So I'm choosing not to choose here. This is kind of a Stax, Rolling Stones kind of a thing, so it makes sense for this type of material. So you can also hear, the other thing worth pointing out, you can hear the guide vocal in there. That's me singing into the drum overheads. And there's no problem with that. It will probably read as a kind of reverb. The vocal melody is already written, so when I sing over it louder, it's just going to sound thicker and more present. Um, there's no real problem with bleed unless the bleed is louder than your source or it's uneven in your overheads. That's a problem. And for me, the problem is one time I did a guitar while there was drums going. We did the drums and guitar at the same time, and there was bleed into the overheads from the one guitar, and I was just really frustrated that it wasn't in from the other guitars too, and I had to fake that. So that's the problem with bleed, is that it sounds too good. So I'm for it. Don't let anybody tell you different. Experiment with it. Figure it out. So what are we talking about here today? First of all, you'll see there are tape simulators on tons of stuff here. Pretty much everything. And so I am going to start with the bass here because one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was that you need to pick in the arrangement before you've tracked anything. You need to pick in the arrangement whether the bass or the kick is going to be more dominant. And to me, nearly every time, this could be because I'm a vintage person, it could be realism, I think that the bass should be lower. So you can see here that I've given about 3 dB at 60 hertz. And that's going to be the foundation that supports everything. I don't like artificially enhancing too much low end on a kick. I've never heard a kick in real life that was actually had a lower fundamental than a bass. and I don't like putting the bass guitar in between the kick drum and the snare. Um, it just sounds sort of confusing and irritating to me, so I don't like to do that. Only other thing I'm doing here is a bit of 1000 hertz. And a fun little tip here, the crosstalk function of this adds quite a lot of low mid, and I've got it at 15 IPS. Hit it relatively hard here. So next, same thing, 15 IPS, and I'm aiming as much as possible there to keep the meter close to zero. And that's something I learned from Tony Platt in his discussion of making Back in Black. There are quite detailed notes on that, and I encourage you to check them out. He was trained in the English way. He was trained through some people who went to people from Olympic Studios. So that's kind of my go-to. That's my favorite studio. That's what I was thinking of. So the theory there is that you're hitting the kick hard to tape, you're hitting the bass hard to tape, you're hitting the guitars, but you're not doing the cymbals. The cymbals are much less. They're on a lower setting here. 15 IPS for everything on the drums because of the low mid boost. So the EQ thing, now we're going, the kick, so bass was at 60, kick is at 100. So these points are very well chosen if you ask me. This is why I like vintage EQs, because there's a purpose behind every point on them. When you have a parametric EQ, which is what I learned on fully parametric EQ in Pro Tools, I found it kind of overwhelming. You can make any curve, you can pick any point, and that just makes you think like, it just becomes kind of a trial and error thing. Whereas when you understand the philosophy that you're trying to create audio lanes and that everything should be, enhanced at its most fundamental frequency, and then further up there's going to be some other stuff, because like you see here, this is the root, this is 100 hertz, but I'm also giving it some 700, and that's what makes it sound slappier. 100 hertz is the boom, 700 is the punch, but 60 dB there at 700. Occasionally I will add a bit at 10 or 14, but I'm not there yet in this one. That's to taste, that's optional. Now again, less color on the snare, because what I tend to do here is add quite a bit of 700. That to me is what makes a snare. This is the glory of the Helios EQ, giving just a ton of 700 there. Really punchy and thick sounding. That's what makes it ride out over the guitars. But again, on the low end, now we've come up to 200. So now we have that's the main. So like that's the main foundation of the mix. 300 is usually where I'm going to start cutting. I might run things through multiple stages. Sometimes what I do is that I'll have one EQ channel strip, one console channel strip before the tape, and then another after, to simulate it going in to tape and then coming out. But the thing to take away from here is bass at 60, kick at 100, snare at 200. The bass is going to be on top of that. You're going to want like 1K, kick and snare you're going to want more like 700. This is how I do it. This is what I like. The point of this is not for you to copy exactly what I do, but for you to take from this idea and decide what you want and see what sounds better on what you do. A lot of people prefer to have the kick lower. That's fine. Try it that way. That's the Led Zeppelin way. They use the same, the Helios stuff is perfectly fine for that too. You can do this with any EQ. Go and find any vintage EQ. If you have these plugins, they go on sale, they're $20, whatever. We have folders full of them. I encourage you to look at one of these and say, where are the points and what do the points sound good on? If it's got a lot of stuff in the mid-range happening, you might try that on guitars. Figure out, like on the API, it's going to be 50 at the bottom, not 60. So, see whether you like that frequency or the other. See which ones, fit what you're doing the most. But whether you do what I want you to or not, whether you do this or not, rather, um, figure out what works for you. Try this. Try it another way. And I hope you enjoy and I hope you've learned something from this.